Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to the Injustice Anywhere radio program. My name is Bruce Fisher. Today is June 16th, 2015. Injustice Anywhere is an all-volunteer organization working to correct wrongful convictions. You can view our main website at injustice-anywhere.org. You can also Google Injustice Anywhere, and you should see our main website right at the top of the page. When visiting, you will find links to Facebook and Twitter. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter in order to keep up to date with current events. All of our radio shows are available as podcasts on our radio station show page after our live broadcasts. Please spread the word about our new station on Spreaker. It'll also help a great deal if you follow our page. You can sign in with Facebook on Spreaker to follow pages. It really only takes a minute. Tonight we'll be discussing the Jimmy Dennis case in Pennsylvania. Tonight's guests will be advocates Tonya, Sneed, and Darren Motise. Jimmy was convicted and sentenced to death in 1992 for the fatal shooting of a 17-year-old high school student, Chedell Ray Williams, in North Philadelphia in 1991. The shooting took place at a bus stop over an apparent theft of earrings. Jimmy's conviction was secured by questionable eyewitness testimony. 3 eyewitnesses claiming to see Jimmy described a perpetrator that was 5'10" or taller, weighing between 170 and 190 pounds. Jimmy is 5'4", and he weighed 130 pounds at the time of the murder. There is no physical evidence linking Jimmy Dennis to this crime. Jimmy has steadfastly maintained his innocence, and he has supporters around the world that are currently fighting for his freedom. A federal judge overturned Jimmy's conviction in 2013. That 2013 ruling was then overturned by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in February of this year. The February decision was then vacated in May, with a new hearing currently pending on this case. Let's get this conversation started. I would now like to introduce tonight's guests. Hi, Tonya. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, Darren. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm glad to finally be a guest on your show, which I have heard several times, so it's an honor to be here.
Sounds good.
To spread the word about Jimmy's case.
Very happy to have you. Now, before we get into the facts of the case, I'd like to hear a little bit about how both of you became involved with Jimmy's case. Tonya, if we could start with you, how did you become involved?
Well, I live in Illinois, and I first became, interested in the issue of the death penalty in 1998. Northwestern University, they had a gathering of death row exonerees, and I at that point I was already opposed to the death penalty, but I kind of assumed anybody who received the death penalty was guilty, because I just assumed that they would have a lot of evidence against somebody if they're going to execute a person. And so I was really astounded by the fact that there were so many people that were part of this exoneration gathering. And so I started following the death penalty, and I started going to anti-death penalty meetings and things of that nature. And then I ultimately decided that what I wanted to do was to find somebody who's innocent on death row and support that person. In the meantime, Governor Ryan of Illinois, he had issued a moratorium on the death penalty, and so there was a lot of things going on related to issues of innocence. So I did a lot of research on the internet, and I found Jimmy's case, and I think of all the cases I looked at, I was really compelled by it, but I didn't fully support him, though, until after I received a lot of documents. I started gathering, like, the trial transcript and the briefs and all that.
So you did extensive research on the case.
What's that?
So you did extensive research on the case.
I did. In fact, I started writing him in August of 2000, and I wasn't ready until December of 2001, before I was able to say, I know this person is innocent. By that point, I had gathered about every document you can imagine. I got police statements, and I went to the Philadelphia courthouse, and so I was very, very thorough, and it was alarming to me that there was virtually no real evidence against Jimmy. And so in December of 2001, I built the website, jimmydennis.org. And so,
yes,
and
here we are
Tonya.
today.
And Tonya's work is what brought me to the case and many others because of all the research she did. And she started that amazing website, which I came across in 2011.
Okay, so how did you initially come across that website? Was it through social media?
It was, and in around 2009 is when I started becoming aware of wrongful convictions, and it was learning about the case of Todd Willingham. And then I said, wow, they're not only convicting people wrongly, they're actually wrongfully executing them. And then I learned about the Troy Davis case that pretty much the whole world knew about, and was very taken by that and horrified. And I had a free weekend at the time of his funeral down in Savannah, and I flew down there, and it was an experience that really had changed my life. The body was laying there in the coffin and everything, and I mean, I didn't see it, but the coffin's right up there. I mean, it really moves you when you see something like that. And I remembered Troy's words, which he said so often, where to continue to fight the fight and to help others in his similar predicament, which I kind of vowed to do there. And when I got home, I kind of went online and said, well, who can I find? And I said, you mean there are lots to choose from? And sure enough, I found that out. It was a big education for me. And then I kind of fell across the name of Jimmy Dennis and kind of learned about the case and was just as astonished as reading all the facts about Troy Davis and Todd Willingham. And I said, I'm going to look into this. And then I contacted Tonya, and that's how we got connected.
It's good to hear that those cases, even though they ended incorrectly, that they did lead you to look to help others that are currently can still be saved at this point. So that's refreshing to hear that that was a reason why you got involved.
Yeah, it was.
Now, Darren, can you give us a brief overview of the crime that occurred in this case? Where did it take place, and what is believed to have happened?
Sure. Right in Philadelphia. And it was like you said, back in 1991, October 22nd. And it was in a very unusual location of Philadelphia. I had visited the crime scene, so has Tonya. It occurred in the northern Philadelphia area and at a subway bus kind of station where they both would meet, the train and the bus, and it's called the Fern Rock Station, actually. And it's in a suburban area. And what had happened in the middle of the afternoon on this fall day, these two girls, they were coming from school, and they were in high school and around 17 years old, and they took the bus from school to the station. It's a very suburban area. It's not, you've got to imagine it's not in like Philadelphia, as most people think of Philadelphia. It would be like if you put this giant station in the middle of someone's like suburban neighborhood. And, but they got off the bus, and one of them needed to continue, one of the girls needed to continue on to another location. So she kind of just went up to buy, I guess in New York, they call it the Metro card. She just went to get a ticket, a pass, whatever. And she never made it up the steps because as the two girls were going up, two guys were coming down, and they said, give me your earrings. And they kind of freaked out, looked at each other, ran down the steps. The victim ran into the street while her friend, went kind of hiding behind a fruit stand. That's how the story goes. And before you knew it, just a few, maybe 20 seconds later, she heard a shot. One of the guys shot her friend right in the neck. And then they both, the shooter and the other guy that was with him, ran up this street that just kind of heads up a hill and got into a car where a third person, like one of their friends, was waiting, and they took off.
So allegedly 3 perpetrators of the crime.
Yes, 3.
Now, Tonya, what was known about Jimmy Dennis at the time? What was going on in his life at the time of the murder?
He was an amateur musician, and actually his singing group, he was the lead singer in a group called Sensation. And they were doing so well. They had lots of awards. They performed quite a bit. And in fact, as I've learned since, and was talking to one of the members of this group, at one point they even beat Boys to Men in an amateur contest before Boys to Men became Boys to Men, before they became famous. So that gives you an idea of what good singers they were. And so for Jimmy to be falsely accused of this crime, of course, this was robbing him of his dreams.
Now, how did he become a suspect? How was he on the police radar?
Well, that's very simple. It was nothing more than just rumors by these neighborhood teens that were hanging around. There's in the projects where he was from, famous projects in Philadelphia called the Abbotsford Homes. So he became a suspect by these rumors with these teens with criminal records themselves. Nothing else, absolutely nothing else. And before you know it, they start, even though they contacted the person who was named the source of the rumors, they pretty much got, go check this one out. They did, and the guy said, well, I don't really know anything, and Jimmy's not into guns at all, and he's 5'5" and doesn't really match it. And before you know it, the cops start showing Jimmy's photo in a photo array in the number one position to witnesses.
What would even cause anybody in the neighborhood to bring his name up in the first place?
That we don't know, except that Tonya, I think you might know this, that Jimmy kind of hung out with two other people and they drove around in a car, so maybe they thought, does that sound right, Tonya? Right.
That day, Jimmy was with Derek Stallworth and Rodney Johns, and originally the police, their story was that the three of them, or at least that this was what supposedly they were alleging, that Derek Stallworth, Rodney Johns, and Jimmy Dennis did this crime together. People in the neighborhood knew that the three of them had been in a car together. But the problem is that they were in a car much later in the afternoon than when this murder took place, in a car that belonged to Derek Stallworth that didn't match the description of the getaway car used in the murder. And Rodney Johns gave a statement to the police, and he was never charged in this crime. Derek Stallworth, we know he gave a statement to the police. That statement has never been turned over. He also was never charged. We believe most likely that his statement had exculpatory evidence that would have helped Jimmy. For instance, perhaps my thought is that maybe Derek Stallworth had a solid alibi that couldn't, be challenged, and so they decided not to pursue him either. And so really that should have dropped the whole case, that they couldn't put the three of them together. But
did they ever try to piece together any other perpetrators to fit the three perpetrator crime?
Did they have other suspects?
Did they ever have any other suspects? Was anybody else charged?
No. No one else was charged. It was a case of true, if you want to call it tunnel vision, but I'm convinced it was an intentional tunnel vision. He was their quote unquote person of interest, and they said, I think we want to nail this guy, and let's not look at other suspects. There was other suspect evidence, but it wasn't revealed till about 10 years later. That's something also about the case.
We'll get into that too, sure. Now, I mentioned it in the intro, and then you mentioned it as well, Darren, that there was an apparent theft of earrings. Did the victim's friend testify to hearing that? Or how was it known that it was earrings? Yeah,
because she heard it. The exact quote was, "Give me your effing earrings."
Now, did she testify against Jimmy?
Oh, she sure did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that girl. Her name is Zara Howard. Zara, Z-A-H-R-A.
So she became an integral part of the prosecution's case.
Yes, you would call her the key witness.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. I would say that.
Now, how many days had gone by before Jimmy was brought in for questioning?
The murder happened October 22nd, 1991, and I believe Jimmy wasn't arrested until late November.
Later. Yeah, it was like November 23rd, just That's exactly right. Like 4 weeks later. But he was just arrested. He didn't get called in, even though he went to the police station twice. once with the help of a lawyer, once with his parents, and said, "I'm hearing these rumors that maybe I did it." And they went to him, and he went to the police, and they said, "No, we don't want to talk to you." But of course, meanwhile, they were hatching this plan against him. They just didn't want him to suspect it.
So there was no formal questioning. He was simply arrested.
Correct.
Now, Tonya, from what I'm reading here on your website, Jimmy spent about a year in prison awaiting trial. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And where was he housed during that time?
I just believe in the Philadelphia jail.
Has he had any statements about that time in prison, that year before he even went to trial? Was he treated properly?
You know, I know that he was threatened at times, and he found it very dangerous there, and he himself was going through quite a bit with feeling so threatened and stuff because this case was huge in the media. It was like there was a lot of pressure on the police to solve this case. There had been a rash of crimes where someone was killed for a starter jacket or some shoes or some jewelry. And so this case had received a lot of media attention. And so when Jimmy is incarcerated for it, of course, you know that there's a lot of eyes on him. And in fact, they even had at the local high schools, they had a no gold day in honor of Chedell Williams. And so I think part of what happened, too, is that the police had so much pressure to solve this that they just decided, you know, it doesn't matter, we'll just pick somebody.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, Tonya, I know you got in a little bit later on it, but I can tell just from your knowledge and from your website, you've researched this extensively from the beginning. Did the media turn on Jimmy during that year before his trial? Was it a hot topic, is not only for the crime, but was the attention solely on him in the media during that 1 year waiting period?
Yes, and in fact, they made him out to be, like, as Jimmy has said, at a modern day Jesse James. Like, they were saying he's doing they were charging him with a number of robberies, and yeah, it was, I think what happens when these kind of cases happen where there's a lot of media attention, people begin to assume the guilt of the person charged.
And the media was fueling that at the time.
They were.
Yeah, he was all but convicted before he even entered the court.
Now, did Jimmy have any criminal record before this arrest?
He did. He had a case of possession of drugs, and in fact, he said that he was nowhere near where the drugs were, and but he found it would be easier for him if he would just plea bargain, because he was facing, you know, time in jail. And so he regrets to this day that he didn't plead not guilty, because had he pled not guilty, he would have still been incarcerated at the time of the murder and wouldn't have been falsely charged with the murder.
Now, in our brief discussion, Darren, yesterday, you mentioned that he had ineffective counsel at trial. When the trial started, did he have a public defender, or was it a hired attorney?
It was his own hired attorney, but the guy, his name's Lee Mandel. He had about 46 court-appointed cases, but Jimmy's was not one of his. So can you imagine that? 46 court-appointed cases at the same time. And so he completely neglected Jimmy. Yes, but he was his own private attorney that he got through a friend.
So he was overwhelmed.
Completely.
Yeah, he met with Jimmy after Jimmy was arrested. Jimmy didn't call for an attorney initially. You know, at the police station, he gave a statement. But shortly after after that, he met with him. And then the next time Jimmy saw him was a day before the trial, a year later.
Unbelievable.
Now, Jimmy's trial has come under intense scrutiny. I'd like to go over the issues that have been made.
Sure.
You know, from the beginning. Did the prosecution offer any deals to Jimmy before going to trial?
They did, and Jimmy refused. He said, you know, innocent people don't take deals.
So he was offered a deal. Do you know what the deal was?
You know, I'm not going to remember exactly. I want to say that it was a life sentence rather than possibly face the death penalty, but I'm not positive on that.
They were just basically telling him that he wouldn't be put to death if he admitted guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, both of you might want to chime in on this because I don't know if it's complex or if it's a simple question, but does Jimmy have an alibi?
Yes, he certainly did, and it is also at the same time complex. It's one of the key themes to his defense, that along with the eyewitness identifications. Pretty much that's all he had, alibi and eyewitness, because there was no physical evidence at all. And the alibi one is so striking because that's the one where because of suppressed evidence that the prosecutor had, another key witness testified for the Commonwealth instead of for Jimmy, and that's why he even mentioned this girl, because he said he had seen her on the bus at 2:00 as he's at the time of the crime. He knew her name, and when he got off the bus, they both saw each other from across the street after getting off the bus, and they waved. And their description of that event absolutely coincides in every detail except the time of when they actually met. And the time is key into the controversy. Well, it's not even controversy because there is a document that shows what time this girl had cashed a check at what she calls a 3-2 center. And she said that she saw Jimmy 2 hours later than what Jimmy was saying. Jimmy's saying, no, I saw her between 2 and 2:30. She's saying, no, I think it was 4 to 4:30 because I get out of work at 2. Well, that day she didn't get out of work at 2. She actually got out of work much sooner because she actually cashed her check, her welfare check, at 1:00. It was exactly 1:03. And because she didn't have this document, this receipt that showed when she cashed the check, she was allowed to testify and make this terrible mistake, which would have totally helped Jimmy. She was allowed to testify, but the worst part about it, the prosecutor, the police, and Roger King, who was the prosecutor, they knew about this receipt because they took it from her. They took her only copy. They allowed her to give false testimony and never correct it. Now, my explanation may not have been so clear just coming out like that because it's a lot to talk about. So, Tonya, if you want to take over a little bit, or Bruce, was that clear enough? It's we can keep talking about it.
Well,
but
sure. When you raised another topic, it sounds to me like you just brought up a Brady violation. But if Tonya wants to step in first on the alibi, if she has anything to add on that.
Yeah, it is a Brady violation what they did there, and she did comment in her statement that she may have, because she did, initially have the receipt, and she may have thought that because it was timestamped 1303, and she said that she might have thought that meant 303, but it was timestamped in military time. So that made her, when she saw it was stamped 1303, then she knows that she saw Jimmy about an hour to an hour and a half afterwards.
And she's being questioned over a year later, correct?
I don't know when I'm not sure exactly when I guess it would have, I'm not sure exactly when the prosecutors would have pursued her. Okay.
I don't know if she gave her statements early on or if she did not.
No, she gave testimony in the trial, of course, and I'm pretty sure also at the hearing. There was a pre-hearing in December of that year, but she definitely met with the cop at the time, very close to the time of the crime, and that's when they took her only copy of the receipt. She said in a statement that she gave after the trial, she wrote an affidavit and said, I definitely made a mistake. Most likely because I didn't understand military time, and I thought 1303 actually meant 303. And she admits that she said either in trial or in this police or in her affidavit, she said that she based her schedule, about her memory of the schedule, on that receipt.
But this information came out after trial.
It is.
Okay, this is part of his appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at this case, this murder occurred right in the middle of the day. It seems like it was a busy area. There should have been plenty of witnesses to see this crime take place. Who were the witnesses that came forward that actually led to the conviction of Jimmy Dennis? Can we go through the key witnesses that testified at trial?
Sure.
Who would like to start?
Sure.
There were most likely many witnesses. One police officer said that there were likely 50 or more people present at that time of day. But we know now of a total of 9 different witnesses who have given some kind of statement. Only 3 of those witnesses testified at trial, and they were the young woman that was with Chedell Williams, Zara Howard, Thomas Bertha, and James Cameron. And those 3 eyewitnesses, by their own account, said that the person who committed the crime weighed in the vicinity of 170 to 190 pounds, as you mentioned already, and was 5'9", 5'10", or taller. And so, another witness actually said that the person who did it was taller than the victim. And the victim, Chedell Williams, was 5'10". Jimmy is 5'4". So that difference in height is significant. 5'4" for a man is quite short. 5'10" for a female is quite tall. You would expect that some witness would have said, oh, the person who did this was much shorter than the victim. But there's not a single witness who says that. In fact, instead, you have a witness named David Leroy who actually comments about how the person who shot Chedell was taller than her. And so, and also these 3 eyewitnesses who testified, they said by their original statements and their original, in the preliminary hearing, they said that the person, that they saw the shooter for 1 second. That was Thomas Bertha's statement. James Cameron said he saw the shooter for 5 seconds, the shooter's face. And Zara Howard said 5 seconds, and James Cameron said 20 seconds. So by their own accounts, they're barely having any time to even look at the perpetrator's face. And we know from research that eyewitnesses in a traumatic situation like this, they don't look at the face of the perpetrator. They're looking at the weapon. And so the chances that a total stranger that they could later re-identify is quite slim.
Now, were these witness identifications made out in the street, or were they made on the stairs?
They were a combination of both, and they were all witnesses for the prosecution in the trial, because they would eventually go on to falsely identify Jimmy. But they occurred on the steps when. Is that what you're referring to, when they
right.
saw the person? Yes. So the girl saw him on the steps, and then also in the middle of the street. And the other 2 witnesses saw from their vantage point outside, and they saw what was going on in the street.
Was it ever brought up at trial that the stairs could have skewed the appearance of height?
I don't think so, but we've always thought that. Because someone's coming down, and how can you really tell? She was very, very short. Zara Howard was 5'2", and she's looking up at some guy that's technically, these guys are supposed to be 5'9", 5'10", and taller, because people have said that the second guy was even taller than the first guy.
And she was also ducking for cover at the same time, correct?
Yeah. It happened very fast. I don't know how they can tell or see anything.
Now, was this gun ever recovered?
No. Not even close.
So there's no murder weapon, there's no physical evidence at all linking Jimmy Dennis to the crime at the scene?
That's correct.
Absolutely none, yeah. We don't have the earrings. The car has never been at all found or connected with Jimmy. There's no fingerprints, no DNA.
Did Jimmy know the victim?
No.
Did any of the suspects know Jimmy? Did any of the witnesses know Jimmy?
No, that's complete stranger identification.
So they never seen him before. He wasn't known. They didn't know him from the neighborhood. No. This was just a first-time shot.
Yes, complete stranger, yes.
Basically, they testified that they saw the shooter, and they went along with, from what I can see, they went along with the person the police had in custody.
Yeah.
Now, at trial, Tonya, I don't know if you can step in here and try to fill me in on this. How were they able to get a conviction when there was apparently 3 perpetrators? How did they make the case with 2 of those perpetrators missing?
It wasn't a focus at all. And unfortunately, Jimmy's defense attorney, who did so little preparation, did not make it a focus. So the attention was just mostly centered on Jimmy. And by the time of the trial, these 3 eyewitnesses that they were the only 3 eyewitnesses who selected both Jimmy's picture from the photo array and from the lineup. We never get to hear from, at trial, the other 6 witnesses. Which really, if Lee Mandel had the time, he should have brought those other witnesses to trial. And but by the time of the trial, those 3 eyewitnesses, they have now become confident that Jimmy is the shooter. And we know from research on strange identification and eyewitness testimony that this often is what happens. And initially, in their initial statements, and we have the original police statements where they're saying things like, this guy kind of looks like him, but I can't be sure. We know that what happens, that eventually later, as the police say, oh, we've got the guy, then later their confidence grows.
Right. At trial, they become much more confident over time. They also want to sound knowledgeable.
Right.
There is pressure involved to being on the stand, and you want to get it right. You think you're doing the right thing for the prosecution. Unfortunately, mistakes like this can happen. The witnesses that did testify, they had no reason to hold a grudge against Jimmy. They were basically just following the lead of the police, correct?
One would assume at first, yes. Yes.
Nothing ever came out during the trial or afterwards to suggest that there was any connection whatsoever. Total stranger identification.
That is, yes, correct.
Okay, now, Darren, you mentioned that the prosecution withheld evidence during trial. Can we elaborate on that a little bit more? And was that a key point in eventually having the conviction overturned in 2013?
Sure, because there were 3 Brady claims, and for any listener that may not know what that is, that just means suppressed evidence that would have been favorable for the defense. And the suppressed evidence doesn't even have to be actually intentional. It could be intentional or inadvertent. But Jimmy, since his direct appeal, had been trying to make a case to get a new trial based on the alibi woman. Her name is Tonya, the girl he saw on the bus. That statement, that document that proved that she in fact got her timing wrong and that she did in fact see Jimmy at the time that he said. Jimmy didn't find out about that document, her time-stamped receipt, until several years after he was in jail. He just found it when they were going to go on direct appeal. It was suddenly, it surfaced. They found it through, I guess, what they call post-conviction discovery or whatever.
So this eliminated his possibility of his defense team putting a witness on the stand stating that Jimmy was in another location at the time of the murder. I mean, it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And her testifying against Tonya Kaysen's testimony against Jimmy was absolutely devastating to his case. It destroyed it completely. If they had that document there, it would have been so favorable. There's no question that his trial would have gone totally differently if that document were present. And yet some of those states, and he's still in prison 22 years later. And thank goodness for Judge Brody to see that. And the other courts weren't even really ruling on it, or they would say it's immaterial, or they wouldn't give him a hearing on it, over and over and over again. And then the lawyers keep trying to go back again. And
what were the other two items that were withheld?
Yeah, the other two. Okay, so then there was evidence of other suspects. And that there were 6 documents that were pointing to a suspect that said that he knew who did the killing. And there were 6 documents, and he said, I think you can look into this, and here they are, here are the names, and go check out where they live. He gave the addresses, he gave their relatives' addresses, he gave the names, and the police pretty much just investigated one of those 3 people, never investigated, went on to investigate the others or their families, and anyone associated with that report. They simply kept focusing on Jimmy.
And that report was also completely withheld from the defense, or did they know that the police did investigate the one person?
No one knew. Jimmy and his defense attorney or anyone during that, from the time he was from before conviction to after conviction until 10 years later. It was, I believe, 2002 when that other suspect evidence came into existence. I mean, they found it. Now, that's very serious. It was 10 years later.
Sure.
The other document is something, it's not a document. It's a statement that this friend of Chedell Williams, the victim, her name's Zara Howard, and she gave several statements to relatives on the day of the murder or the day after, very, very close to the time, that completely contradicted the reports that she gave to the police. And again, Jimmy didn't know about this till 10 years later. And what that report, what that incident was, is she told the police she never knew the shooter, that she'd never seen him, she never recognized him. Suddenly, she's telling her aunt, her name is Diane Pugh. It was not Zara's aunt, but Chedell Williams' aunt. And they're sitting there talking around, and Zara tells Chedell's aunt, Mrs. Pugh, that she recognized the killers, the shooter and his friend, from Olney High School, where she had gone, where Jimmy did not go. So just let that sink in. I mean,
sure.
And then the next day, she tells another victim's aunt, a lot of aunts here, that the getaway car that she never actually saw, but I guess she heard about it on the news. The getaway car was some Chevy Malibu, gold, 2-tone top, etc. She said that she saw that car following her and her friend Chedell around for a whole week prior. She also said that she recognized I guess a girl named Kim and a guy named Quentin. It was later quickly discovered that Quentin was a nephew of one of those aunts, so it was kind of family and stuff. And so she's saying all these 3 different things about these 2 different people at the scene, saying that the car was following them around, and saying that the perpetrators were from her high school, called Olney High School. That information never, ever came to trial, and it wasn't only till 10 years after. And that is absolutely...
And like you said in the beginning, she was a key.
Yeah. I mean, they could have... If that were heard at trial, wow. And...
Yeah, if that information was known to cross-examine her, the situation would have been much different while she was on the stand.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The police knew all about this because they took the report they were interviewing her. They had gone to her house just about 2 or 3 days after the murder. They were going to show her a photo array. They had that on the schedule. But then the aunts, the Mrs. Pugh, and then her other person's name is Elaine Parker, they made a phone call or visited the police and said, well, you need to hear this because we've got some more information from Zara Howard, and she didn't tell you the whole story, etc. Well, they make a note, because Jimmy's lawyers found this. There was a note, it's called a police activity sheet, that said the police planned to go interview, to bring up this inconsistency to Zara Howard, like the following day. So they go over to her house, her apartment, wherever, and they never mentioned it, despite their intent to mention it. And one of those reports that came from one of the aunts happened on the same day, just 6 hours prior to when the police went over. So imagine the police hear a statement that says, well, she said the car was following her all over for a week. And 6 hours later, after they hear that report, they go to her house and they don't even ask her that. Instead, they're just focusing on, what do you think? Is this the one? And that's inconceivable.
It absolutely is. And if the defense had all the information, things would have went much differently. I believe that the alibi evidence is, to me, it's the largest piece of evidence that they withheld. The witness evidence that they withheld is ridiculous on itself, because that was their key witness. And
agreed.
If Jimmy's attorney, even though he was overloaded with cases, if he had that information, he would have been able to give a proper cross-examination.
Oh, yes. I mean, the entire case is absolutely replete with instances of the counsel's deficient performance. One of Jimmy's lawyers, I think it was a really interesting term, he called it chronic incompetence or chronic ineffectiveness.
You're talking about his current counsel.
I'm talking about his lawyer today. They wrote in their amazing brief that they used the word chronic, that this Lee Mandel, Jimmy's lawyer at the time in 1992, was just constantly and pathologically incompetent and ineffective. He didn't do anything, and he never objected to everything that went wrong in this trial, which so many things did.
Now, we've gone over the witnesses, the possible alibi. Now, Tonya, what was the motive given at trial? Was it simply the theft of earrings, or did the prosecution try to build any other motive at all against Jimmy Dennis?
It's really interesting that the prosecutor, Roger King, at one point, he even concedes that Jimmy lacked a motive. And he says, motive, must there be a motive? And, in my mind, unless you're mentally deranged, there should be one. And so, but yeah, Jimmy completely lacked a motive to commit murder. George Pratt, it was this promoter and producer and manager in this company called GW Management Incorporated, and he testified that he had his own record label and that at the time of Jimmy's arrest, he had a verbal contract with Jimmy and was in the process of completing a written contract with him to produce music. And so when he was on the stand, Roger King did nothing to challenge that. It was left to, that it was true, that Jimmy was about to get signed on with a singing contract. And so it is ludicrous to believe that he would take a chance with that and go kill someone that he doesn't know for gold earrings that how would he even know if they have value. We know, by the way, that those earrings had been stolen a few months before. And
what's the
we
story
know
about that?
Jimmy was not involved in that.
And the police did nothing to investigate that whatsoever.
Now, how are the earrings stolen months before? Explain that to me, because the person coming down the stairs, according to the witness, said, give me those earrings. So was she wearing earrings, or is that whole story possibly incorrect?
The same earrings apparently were stolen, and somehow her boyfriend at the time, in the summer before, he had found out who had taken the earrings, and he got them back. And then she had them again. And I mean, I think it's good, it'd be my assumption that whoever stole them the second time, likely was involved the first time on some level, if not the actual person that stole them the first time.
And that was never investigated at all?
Not at all.
Not that we know of. Mm-mm.
Not at all. And even this other suspect that, when we call it the other suspect evidence, said, I think, this man who called the police and said, I know who did this. He even gave an address of the pawn shop, and the police, there's no record of them ever even going to that pawn shop. It's beyond belief what the police didn't do.
Just a complete lack of investigation. Now, as far as Jimmy's defense goes, Darren, who did they call for witnesses? What was their witness list?
Oh, very interesting. Because he didn't really have many. Because you have that was all of his lawyer's fault. The only thing he had was that alibi witness, and then which that didn't work out too well. And he didn't have any witnesses that, there were 9 total witnesses. 3 of them testified, only 3. And the 4th didn't testify because he actually didn't. We call him the 4th because there were 3 people who went to trial, but 4 people were shown photo array. Four people were shown photo arrays, and they hesitatingly picked out Jimmy. The other 5 were not even. The other 5 were shown photos, but they were never. Even though Jimmy's lawyer at the time said, "I want all of these people. I want all of the other witnesses to attend a lineup," but they were never called, and actually his lawyer at the time didn't even know about the other witnesses, so that was suppressed for a while too. So you have these 3 witnesses that go to trial, and they're all saying, because they picked out Jimmy, and then they went to the lineup and picked him out, and Jimmy didn't have any other witnesses. He didn't even know about them because his lawyer did 0 work. And so, and these people didn't pick him out at the photo. One couldn't do it. The other one said, "No, that's not him." And then someone went to the lineup and said, "That's not him." Another person, was it George Ritchie, Tonya, he was one who said, "I could definitely tell I'd be of help if I can see the photo array and a lineup." Well, he went to the photo array and was not able to make an identification, but the police never even told the defense that this man even did a photo array procedure. And they found out, 10 years later, and they're calling Jimmy, this guy George Ritchie, in on an appeal thing 10 years later, and they just struck that from the record. No one even knew about that. He didn't make an identification. So as far as those other witnesses, they would have been great. They would have helped him out, but they weren't at trial because of his lawyer. And so all he had remaining were friends kind of saying, "Oh, he's a nice guy," just character stuff. Character
witness. Now, do you have affidavits now from those witnesses that you mentioned that were part of his appeal?
There are statements from the additional eyewitnesses.
The ones
like
that
George
Darren
Ritchie
just mentioned, are they part? Are their
Right.
statements part of any were they part of any of the appeals or the current one now pending?
I don't know, Tonya. I know George Ritchie appeared on appeal in 2005. He was there at the hearing, and then David Leroy and the others. I don't think so. I don't think there are affidavits. They just kind of backed out.
Okay. Well, here's what I have in front of me so far. He had a proof of an alibi, which was withheld by prosecutors. He had the key witness in this case was out telling multiple stories. That was completely ignored. There's a couple other witnesses that said they saw him for a second or two, but they misjudged his height by a large margin from 5'4" to 5'10" plus. So there's really no case in front of me so far. There's one person left I'd like to discuss that I read about on the website, and that's Charles Thompson, a member of Jimmy's band. Now, I read that he testified that he saw Jimmy with a gun prior to the murder, and he has now since recanted. Can one of you chime in on that whole situation with Charles Thompson?
Yeah, he said that he saw Jimmy with a gun the night of the murder, and he gave this statement under duress. He was brought in and handcuffed to a chair and was threatened and told that he needed to implicate Jimmy in the crime or he himself was going to be charged. At the time that he gave the statement, there were assault charges against him for assaulting his pregnant girlfriend to such a degree that she actually ended up in the hospital. And so that was never brought out at trial, that Charles Thompson had these charges, these other charges against him. So after he makes the statement, and his statement doesn't say, Jimmy told me that he committed this murder, anything like that. His statement, the only thing that really is bad for Jimmy is the fact that he says he saw Jimmy with a gun the night of the murder. So he doesn't in any way in the statement connect Jimmy to Chedell's murder. But so at trial though, well, by the time of the trial, Charles Thompson's, the charges that were against him, they had been completely dropped. He never had to serve any time for them. And then at the time of the trial, there were new charges, new trumped up charges against Charles Thompson, or maybe they were real charges, I don't know, but there were charges against him for possession of drugs with intent to deliver. And because it wasn't just a simple possession, but also selling drugs, he was facing a long sentence if indeed they would pursue this. And those charges were also dropped following the trial. So we have reason to believe that Charles Thompson was giving these statements and giving his testimony in part because he was in fact he may have even said this, because later he gives a statement, I believe it was in 1996, about 4 years after the trial, where he recants his testimony and his statement. And maybe Darren would remember this, whether in that statement he may have even said explicitly that he thought he would be getting help. And
sure, he did in in his affidavit business, he came out and said that. But basically, no one knew about this. Pennsylvania suppressed all these facts. Basically, Jimmy's lawyer never bothered to investigate the witness. He never even spoke to them. So basically, to sum up what Tonya just said, the jury heard from this supposed friend, in quotes, of Jimmy that on the night of the crime, Jimmy had a gun similar to the murder weapon. But the jury never heard that the witness testified only under a threat of prosecution for a felony, which was then later dropped. And only after attempting to recant, he even tried to recant that testimony on the eve of the trial. He tried to recant it, but Roger King said, no, it's too late, you already gave it.
Right, well, the damage is already done. The jury heard, of course, he didn't connect him directly to the crime, but the jury heard that Jimmy Dennis was seen on the day of the murder with a gun.
Yeah, that's what the jury had to hear, and no one to fight that. No, if Jimmy's lawyer had found the criminal record of this person, he actually, Tonya, he got some record, but it was incomplete at some point. They left out that part, but he could have looked deeper, and but he always relied on the state to give him stuff. He never did anything. So whatever someone blew over to his office, he just opened it up and said, "Oh, okay, this is it." And no criminal record that I could see. But if he had dug deeper on his own, he would have completely seen that he was up for that pregnant beating of his wife. His wife, whatever, girlfriend.
Now, I should mention the other members of Sensation, the other members of Jimmy's singing group, they testified that they had never seen Jimmy with a gun. They did not, because supposedly Charles Thompson, he's saying that he saw Jimmy with a gun while they were practicing singing, and that Jimmy was basically flashing this gun, which first of all, just in thinking of your typical person who might commit a murder, are they going to be hours later flashing the murder weapon? Chances are most people are trying to hide or destroy the weapon. And so it seems a little ludicrous to begin with that the shooter would be flashing this a few hours later.
Yeah, yes, go on.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, and Charles' statement that he gave to the police when they were brutalizing him and forcing words out of him are just like Tonya said, they were completely absurd. Saying he's flashing it around, saying, "Oh, I shoot people all the time. Oh, I shot this guy. Oh, I shot up the neighborhood." It's crazy to read this. In fact, the video I made of it, of Jimmy's case, this little educational video, kind of quotes a little bit about what Charles Thompson said. But you can see that online. You can see his statement. It's absolutely absurd. No one could possibly believe it.
And the defense basically did nothing on cross to calm any of that down. But they did have the other band members testify to contradict what he said. But his words were left out there for the jury to hear. So they actually did. This is one situation where his defense actually did at least attempt to counter what was being said. Yes.
I wanted to throw something in because, Bruce, you had asked about other witnesses in his favor. And part of the most shocking thing about this case is the prosecutorial misconduct of Roger King. Everything he said, from opening statements to closing statements, you have to read it to believe it, to get the real flavor of it. It's something very special to read. It drives you nuts. And in the closing argument, Roger King he underscored the fact, the totally misleading fact. He totally misled the jury to believe that the three eyewitnesses there, James Cameron, Thomas Bertha, and Zara Howard, that were for the prosecution, that these three people who are pointing a finger at Jimmy, when they never even saw enough to even do that, Roger King's giving them the impression that they were the only witnesses to the murder, despite his knowledge to the opposite, because he knew that there were so many other witnesses. And I wrote down a quote, and I can squeeze it in, that he said from the opening statement. This is the kind of person he is. And he'll say awful kind of statements. He comes in like all gross, and he goes like, the buck stops here, and fry him, let's stick a fork in him and turn him over. I mean, this guy's just a whack job. But here's the quote. He says to the jury in his closing argument, he says, "You saw what there was to see, because by the time the police got there was a gold button, a few drops of what could have been blood, and three witnesses, Mr. Cameron, Miss Howard, and Mr. Bertha. They came in here, you saw them." And that's it. So the jury had no reason to even think there was the existence of anything other than those three witnesses, let alone their amazing exculpatory power they would have had.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, prosecutors can stand up in court in front of a jury and they can lie. They're not under oath. Many people don't understand that, but that's the simple truth in our justice system. Many times on appeals, if they're later take the stand, now they're under oath, they're unable to lie, so they have to tell the truth. That happened in the Ryan Ferguson case. The prosecutor stood up in court and outright lied. He told egregious lies in court when he was actually on the stand under oath. Now he's a judge. He had to protect himself and admit that he was wrong. But how many years went by? That's the same thing that happened here. We go from 1992 to 2013 before this case is finally overturned, and it's still not over yet. But I'd like to have each of you describe your feeling about the ruling from Judge Anita Brody that overturned it, because it was pretty clear. Can you elaborate on that? Maybe, Tonya, you could start. I mean, it was a pretty direct ruling by this judge declaring innocence, was it not?
Yeah, there have been so many times where Jimmy's been before a judge, and they just rubber stamped what the lower court has said, and so it has been a really discouraging journey. And so that was such a sign of hope when Anita Brody overturned Jimmy's case. And I have a quote from her: "The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has committed a grave miscarriage of justice in convicting Dennis and sentencing him to die for this crime." And I think her words like that throughout her ruling are just so powerful. I think as I read her ruling, it became clear to me that she believes in Jimmy's innocence, and at minimum, she believes that there just is not the evidence needed to even have him incarcerated, let alone executed.
Now, all of these rulings and documents are available on your website. Is that correct?
We do have a link to Judge Brody's decision. Yes.
Excellent. Everybody should go read that because I thought it was scathing. I thought it was very clear. Now, how was this overturned? What was in February of this year that was vacated? What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I can chime in, unless Tonya, we both kind of are in the same position where we were kind of hesitant to even comment on it. It had something to do with the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. And the three judges that reversed Brody's vacation said it was a short ruling. I didn't actually read it. I was so upset. I just said, I can't deal yet. I just can't even. And to this day, I haven't yet looked at it. But they are not saying that he was not wrongly convicted. And it seemed to be just like another technical issue that I don't know how anyone in their right mind could put him like so-called back in jail. I mean, he was about ready to, you get all that great news and finally somebody sees the most obvious injustice and then they reverse it.
Sure. Now that was vacated again in May, correct? And now there's another hearing pending in October?
Right. Yeah. So, the Jimmy's attorneys, they went before, I forget the total number of Third Circuit judges. I'm kind of learning this as we go. But Jimmy, his case was only before 3 judges, last year. And so in February, those 3 of the full Third Circuit heard his case. And so Jimmy's attorneys then asked the full Third Circuit court if they would look at the case. And I guess this is quite unusual. Most of the time, they won't do anything. They'll just, whatever the 3 judges ruled, they'll leave that standing. But the full Third Circuit said, okay, we'll have a hearing and we'll, listen to the issues. And so that was another great sign of hope that they're going to do this because, as I understand from what the attorneys have told us, that's not common at all.
Now that's what's referred to as en banc, where it goes before the whole Third Circuit, and they sort of can review it as an entire group.
Now, it was that court that reversed this February ruling and then granted it the hearing in October, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So technically, we're back where we were when Judge Brody vacated
in 2013.
Conviction.
Now, he was removed from death row in 2013 when his sentence was overturned. Is that right?
He wasn't physically removed.
But the sentence is...
So he's still housed
vacated.
in the same location as he was before that was overturned in 2013?
Yeah.
Yeah, same location.
So he's still in solitary, he's still 23 hours a day in a cell?
Yes.
Yeah.
But he even said to us and me, and he prefers that because it could be dangerous in general population. But they didn't push for a move.
Okay. We have another case, another death row case, and he tells me the same thing, that he actually feels safe where he is. So I do understand that as much as I possibly can from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, have you both had the opportunity to visit?
I started visiting him probably, I'm trying to think, maybe 2001 or 2002, and then visited him usually once a year for many years. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, Jimmy has refused to take visitors. And I think a lot of this is because he just has become so discouraged with his case. And I think from my perspective, he needs visitors and he should take visitors, but he hasn't been. And Darren has gotten involved in the case since Jimmy has made this decision.
Okay. Now, that was my next question. How are his spirits? Does he have hope that this is eventually going to get overturned?
I would say it's hard to say right now, but he's always a hopeful person on the phone. He's very positive. You talk to him, you can't even imagine that this is a person that anyone would even call a killer. And he's a really nice person to speak with, very, very intelligent. And
so he continues to be in contact. He just doesn't want actual visitors at the prison.
For some reason, yes. And
okay.
I'm not exactly sure why. And but whenever he would want me to go visit, I certainly would.
But you're able to speak with him on the phone.
Yes, and a lot. Not so much these days. There's this kind of a change in staff, but in the past, pretty much it could have been every other day. You could sometimes call one of us every day.
Now, in closing here, I had one last question that I neglected to get to, and it's just a personal question I'm curious about. The key witness, Howard, has she made any statements at all since the trial? Has she been involved in this case in any way since that time?
No, she's refused to speak to people who've attempted, whether it be the attorneys. I know a reporter that attempted to talk to her, and she refused.
Has there been any private investigators on this case to try to look into other suspects and see any other possibilities, whether it be the person that stole the earrings the first time or any of the other suspects?
A little bit of that, right, Tonya? There's been.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly you don't have to find the perpetrators to prove your innocence. I was just curious if anybody voluntarily had looked into it.
Yeah, there was on the part of Jimmy's current lawyers a few things that have gone out with their people, etc. But not a whole lot.
Okay.
I think the focus right now is that what's so stunning is, and I can just sum up really quickly what my whole thoughts on the case are by answering this question.
Sure.
Jimmy has so many claims. It's like one of the greatest things I've ever read in my life, including any novels, books, or anything, is this brief that his lawyers from Arnold and Porter, Ryan Gildes, Amy Rowe, and I don't know who else, James Cooper, I don't know these people who actually wrote this. I think it was Ryan and Amy. There's a 266-page summary of the entire case. I think people can get that somewhere online. I don't know how lawyers can get hold of these exactly, but it's an absolute masterpiece, if you can call it that. No typos, nothing. Everything is so clear, and you get an entire education on you feel like such a great education on the justice system and the legal world. And they tell the whole history of his case in this one document. It was the document that went before Judge Brody, Anita Brody, that she read this, and she only ruled on the Brady claims, on the suppressed evidence claims. But what this whole document shows, the entire claim here are so many issues that Jimmy has been presenting over the years, and finally they all have culminated into this one claim, which basically tells everything about his case. And all the claims we have, the two strongest are Brady and ineffective assistance. Judge Brody, she didn't even get to rule on that. She can still rule on that. If the Third Circuit knocks the next thing down, it's going to go back to her. She can rule on that. Most likely she will vacate the conviction again, but what an up and down roller coaster ride that would be. But there are also unbelievable other amazing claims of things that went wrong in the trial, the prosecutor misconduct of Roger King, saying unbelievable statements at the end, like he would, in his closing statement, he would say things like to the jury, "You are the Commonwealth, you are the community. This is a case of Commonwealth against Jimmy Dennis." I mean, that's a violation of if there's a word for it, but you cannot make statements, "You are the Commonwealth." No, the jury's supposed to be an impartial decider of facts. You don't take the side. The jury's not the Commonwealth. And 3 judges on one of Jimmy's appeals through the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the 3 dissenting judges, it was like 4-3 decision, and the 3 that kind of lost, they said they would have given him a new trial based on those shocking statements that Roger King was making. He also didn't do what they call death qualification, life qualification, where you learn about death sentencing and what your duty is as far as they just skipped all that. It was a terrible constitutional violation. There's a thing called Batson violations that has to do with how you use your peremptory challenges, and you're not allowed to just knock off a person out of the veneer pool just based on their race. And then they have this other thing with the qualification of the death thing, and I think that's also those are known as like there's a Witherspoon violations, things like this. And the only reason I know anything about this is because of the amazing document that these lawyers have made. I wish you could see it. It's the greatest legal thing I've ever seen, and how any judge can look at it. All you can see is, oh my gosh, it was so corrupt. The police are so corrupt. The prosecutor's insane. And yet, this is what the current DA, Seth Williams, and his lawyers, they knocked down. This district judge, Anita Brody, saw this atrocity, this injustice, and she said those words in her brief, and she ruled against in Jimmy's favor based on just Brady alone. And then Seth Williams will appeal that decision and go and side with these corrupt people that violated Jimmy's rights from the moment of the trial till the end.
Protect the office at all costs.
Yes. And it's just so shocking, and it's very, very upsetting. And,
now, is this document available on the website, Tonya?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Is the document that Darren's speaking of, is that available on your website? I don't
believe so.
But we've got it for anyone who may be interested in. But we got it. You mean it's not there? But I think people can get it. People who are in the know about law can get all of these things. Okay. But I'm sure Jimmy doesn't.
Now you mentioned the jury instruction. There's other details of the case we couldn't possibly get to in an hour.
No.
Tonya, can you give us the URL for your website and the other websites where our listeners can go to learn more about the case?
So it's www.jimmydennis.org is my website, and Jimmy, spelled Jimmy, Dennis, Dennis. There's also jimmydennis.com, .net. There's a woman in Germany who has a website for Jimmy, and probably if you just Google Jimmy Dennis, you'll come across a lot of the websites. A couple in Canada actually started the Justice for Jimmy campaign, and they're the ones who maintain the jimmydennis.com site.
So they're all good. They're all approved by you. They're all satisfactory websites. Because I did Google his name. And now, how about Facebook? Do you personally run a Facebook page?
There's several of us who administrate it, and it's called Justice for Jimmy. So just, simply
that's
Justice
easy to
for
find.
Jimmy.
I'm definitely going to take a much closer look at the case and dive in and take and look into this, because I expected to find something, at least one thing that was questionable. The advocates were kind of brushing under the rug. There's always one thing that you can't explain. Right. It doesn't mean that somebody's guilty by any means. Every case we have on our featured case list, there's one or two things where it's questionable either way. There's no proof one way or the other. I can't find anything in this case. I see a group of questionable witnesses. The key witness is out telling fantasies about the case, and that's completely ignored. His alibi is withheld by the prosecution. This is just an insane case to me, so I definitely will be taking a closer look, and I certainly hope our listeners do the same.
Thank you, and you're really up on the case. Judging from your questions, I'm quite impressed that you knew about all of that.
Well, I would like to thank both of you for coming on tonight. I truly think you both helped bring a better understanding of the case to our listeners that may have not been so fine-tuned on the case as you both are.
You're welcome. It was great to be here. Thank you.
So hopefully we'll see you on Facebook. Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Please visit injustice-anywhere.org to learn more about our current featured cases. And please take a moment to click on the Club 22 logo at the bottom of our homepage to learn more about Lauren Hill. Once you do, you may feel the need to help her cause. I certainly know I did. Please join us next week, same time and channel. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.